Hey, just having a little fun playing a cornhole, like you do during what I like to call Cornholy Week. I know the dad jokes are flowing and flying here from the Capel quarantine crib. I want to share a few thoughts though, on a serious note, if I can. Set this up on my handy dandy tripod and just share some thoughts about this Holy Week. Tomorrow is Palm Sunday, and I wish we could be together. One of my favorite times of the year is seeing all the kids waving the fronds, the palm branches, and that celebration of Jesus' triumphal entry, which I'm calling the triumphal entry because Jesus wept. But before that, Jesus wept literally just the day before in John's Gospel. Have you ever had an if only moment? Those if only I had known better. I'll never forget my freshman year at K-State before I pledged AKL, all campus losers. I had just cut the mullet, and it's before classes started, where nobody is studying and Aggieville seems to be accessible. And I come into my dorm room at like 12:30 a.m. and my roommate's TV is on, just this little black and white, and it's Magnum PI going off a cliff in that Ferrari. I so badly wanted to be like Tom Selleck, the mustache, the short shorts, the Hawaiian anyway, and he's going off the cliff, and I'm like, no, how can this be happening? And I scream out my dorm from the 7th floor of Haymaker at K-State. I scream out, why did Magnum have to die? Scream out as loud as I can, and all of a sudden I hear this, shut up, like across the way is Ford Hall, and lights are popping on like a Christmas tree now at almost 1 a.m. And I'm like, you shut up. And now I step back, and I mean this cacophony of sound explodes from between Haymaker and Ford. In fact, the campus security comes down in the car, and he gets on the bullhorn. This is the classic, like what not to do. He's like, please keep it down. You're disturbing the peace. It just got louder. It was crazy. And I pull back like, what did I start? I hide in my closet because there's a bang on the door from the RA. And he just has a key, just barges in, and he finds me with the closet. I'm like, if only I knew what would happen. And he goes, did you start this riot? I'm like, I didn't mean to, but Magnum died. And he was like, I was watching the same episode. It was a dream sequence. What? If only I had known it was a dream. It was crazy. He took my ID, which was my food card at the Derb. And, I was like a tapeworm, so he was taking away more than the average person who needed food like every 2 hours. I couldn't eat for a whole 2 days. It was crazy. If only I had known. Well, I share that ridiculous story of if only because I know you, like myself, have if only moments. If only these seniors who are experiencing loss like never before could have had this happen, or just never happen, of course. If only there were enough flight restrictions earlier on, right? If only there were enough ICU beds. If only we had masks for everyone, which, by the way, my sister-in-law, Megan Capel, is making masks by hand, and we might be venturing into that as well. If only we had dealt with homelessness more seriously by now. If only every kid could have reliable internet access. If only, if only, if only. Well, I want to share the day before Palm Sunday. That's today, it's Saturday. Palm Sunday's tomorrow. Of course, they didn't know it was Palm Sunday back then, 2,000 years ago. Chapter 11 of John's Gospel is one of those if only moments that Jesus shows up in. Famously, some of you may know this story, or infamously, when you hear about Jesus raising someone from the dead, like, yeah, right. Well, he gets word of his friend. The scriptures describe it as a messenger gets sent to Jesus to give him word that his friend Lazarus was dying. And in fact, most likely, based on the evidence, he had died. Lazarus had already died while the messenger was en route 17 miles to where Jesus was. And it says, the one you loved died or is dying. Wouldn't you love to be called the one you loved? That's how close Lazarus was. But Jesus waits, and the apostles are wondering, why are you waiting? And don't you wonder why we're waiting? We are waiting in isolation. waiting and wondering, when will this end, as the news just keeps compounding with more and more problems. When will it all end? If only this pain and suffering could end. This has been the universal question of mankind since the beginning of time. Why would God allow bad things? Why would God allow evil, sickness, sadness, sorrow, separation, death? Why? If only. Well, these miracles that Jesus had been doing leading up to this moment, which again, Holy Week is tomorrow. So this is the day before Holy Week. No one knows this at the time, but he waits to manufacture this miracle. Jesus had been performing miracles, and they weren't just miracles, they were signs. Because the point wasn't the miracle itself, it was the signs pointing people to Jesus. You see, every miracle Jesus did was actually just a restoration of the original intent of the order of creation. It wasn't just like electric writing in the sky. That's what I would have done if I'd had some miraculous powers. But no, everything pointed to the right order, the intended order of God's creation, where there was shalom, which we talked about it at Leewood Pres a few weeks ago. Peace and shalom and wholeness is what we all are created for. And so he waits until Lazarus is in fact dead. 4 days when he shows up, this 17-mile journey to Mary and Martha and Lazarus' home. Mary and Martha are the sisters of Lazarus. All three of those guys were good friends with Jesus. Again, so much so that he was just called the one you loved. And he's there, and Martha greets him, and like, no bones about it. Martha's like, if only you'd been here sooner. It's like, where have you been, Jesus? It's been 4 days. He's buried. It's over. The stench is, and he's like, okay, I want to remove the tomb. And she's like, the stench, it's been 4 days. You don't want to go there, Jesus. It's over. I got people to feed, people to take care of, things to do. That's Martha. And then Mary, just sitting at Jesus' feet, also said the same question. If only you had gotten here sooner. If only. Well, as he's standing there and the other Jewish people around him are gathered with as friends and family, wondering what is Jesus going to do, he says, remove the tomb. Lazarus calls him by name and calls him out. And miracle of miracles, Lazarus comes walking out. Unbelievable. But just prior to that, because that would have been just enough, prior to that, the real miracle is this verse, the first verse I memorized, John 11, verse 25. Jesus wept. So we know, again, the spoiler alert is that Lazarus was raised from the dead, but that's not the real miracle. The real miracle was prior to that, Jesus wept. Lament is what the Bible calls it. Lament. You know, Peter, who was definitely there in that moment, saw Jesus do the miracle of not just raising Lazarus from the dead, but of weeping. That's what inspired Peter to say, cast your cares on him, on God, for he cares for you. Because he saw in that moment how much Jesus cares for you and for me. How can a good God allow bad things to happen to good people has been a question that has kept people far from God. But my hope is that we see in this moment, in this story, that actually Jesus is showing up, coexisting with evil. In fact, Jesus, who was God and fully man, mysteriously, was around evil. He did not eliminate evil. It's funny when people ask that question, how can a good God allow bad things out there in the world to happen to us like we see in the news all the time? We're less concerned with the bad stuff in here. I don't know about you. I think I do know about you because I know about me. I've done plenty of bad things. The in here is bad as well. And what we see is a loving God in Jesus who came to take away our sin, to eliminate the evil from here. And then we all are being the church, spreading hope, faith, and love. And of course, the greatest of these is love. And so in this story of the resurrection of Lazarus, guess what? Spoiler alert again, Lazarus had to have another funeral. Kind of bummer for Lazarus, like, oh, great, again? He had to die, right? He died. But in that moment, this was the last miracle before the ultimate miracle of Jesus, when he raised Lazarus from the dead, and he manufactured this miracle so that he could show everyone that he had dominion, rule, and reign over death itself. This enemy, this foe of every human. And he got rid of it. That's why Paul could say, death, O death, where is your sting? Death, O death, where is your victory? So that's the ultimate expression of God's power over death. He had to show everybody this by waiting. So in the waiting, may we practice lament. Lament is not some spiritualized whining. Lament is actually complaining to God, not about God. May we be people who don't complain about God, but to God. He can handle our doubts and our fears and our aches. We live in the in-between of the promise and the resurrection. And the in-between is the grief and loss and pain that so many of us have carried. And I've walked alongside many of you from our church. You've buried a spouse, a child, a parent too young, a family member's child, another family member, friends' children. That in-between of the promise and the resurrection, there's grief and loss. There's sadness. That's the if-onlys that Jesus enters in. So my hope is that we prepare for this Holy Week leading up to Easter of the resurrection, that we understand, like John said, the reason why I wrote this was so that you will believe. You see, seeing leads to believing, and believing leads to becoming like Christ. That's the goal. You see, when Mary and Martha were like, if only you had shown up earlier, you would think like Jesus was going to give them a sermon or a preacherese speech like some people give, like, hey, you should just listen to this verse, Romans 8:28. And these are great verses, and that's a great verse in the time of pain. But some people are like, I don't want to hear it. And instead, Jesus didn't give a sermon. He wept. This reminds me of one of the most painful times in my life when I had learned that my parents were getting a divorce. My sophomore year in high school, pain, loss, and grief, like many of you high school students are feeling by not being able to finish this last year. I was going to youth group, and as I left youth group, I normally got a ride from someone, and my youth pastor, Ray Briggs, said, hey, can I give you a ride home? Well, unbeknownst to me, he had heard something wasn't, he just heard pray for the Capitals. That's all he knew. And as he was driving me home, he said, hey, how are you doing? And I began to say, not good. And I began to weep. I began to cry. And so Ray takes a left instead of a right to our house in O-Town, and we're going down Ridgeview, and this is when Ridgeview was under construction, heading north on Ridgeview past Santa Fe Trail Middle School. Oh my gosh, I just touched my face. Are you noticing how many times people touch their face? Sorry about that. And as we were flying down Ridgeview in his little Honda Civic, which is why I have a Civic to this day and have driven for years, he was going like, I don't know, way fast, faster than the Civic could go. And we come up upon over K7 or K10 and the road closed sign, and he slams on his brakes and the engine just kind of like stalled out. And then we're sitting there like, whoa. But in that moment of not only taking my mind off of the pain, he sat there weeping with me. He did not give me platitudes, empty platitudes, and just verses to memorize, which are all good to have those messages and words of hope. But he cried with me. He wept with me. That was the most powerful thing he could have done for me and with me. And that's what you and I get to do with each other in these times of waiting and wondering, and if only God would heal. Jesus has revealed himself to us through creation, through the Word of God, the Bible, and through his life, death, and resurrection, which is what we're heading toward this Holy Week. I hope you will experience this Holy Week in a special and unique way like never before, so that you will see what Jesus did and who he is, and you will believe and become more and more like Christ. That's the goal, church. So even though the building may be closed, the church isn't. The church is unstoppable. I'm excited about this journey together through Holy Week. Peace.